Well, howdy, listener, and welcome back to another episode of Connor Reads Books. We have an author interview for you today. Today we are interviewing Drew Harrison, author of Men of the Mountain. We are celebrating the impending release of the Men of the Mountain. As it stands currently, it is not yet out. We are starting a pre-release period where you can get early access codes, and you get the book for free, provided you review it. So maybe it's not completely free. Monetarily, yes. Time-wise, no. But do it anyway. Folks, if you are wanting some of them early access codes, there is a Google Forms link in the episode notes. Go check out the episode notes. Click that Google link. Click the Google Forms link and fill that form out. And see if you can get your hands on an early preview copy of The Men of the Mountain. The preview period starts June 24th, and the book itself launches July 10th. Anyway, I really have a good time talking with Drew today. You may notice this is a longer episode than usual, and it gets longer still. So if you're watching this on YouTube, this is as long as the episode gets. But if you're listening on a podcast platform, go check out YouTube for the, director's cut. Wherever you are enjoying this podcast from, just know that I love you so much. Thank you for being here, and I really hope that you enjoy this episode. Talk to you soon. Howdy, folks, and welcome back to Connor Reads Books, and another installment of author interviews. Joining me today via virtual chat is Drew Harrison, a prolific sci-fi, fantasy, and fiction writer who captures the primal human spirit in increasingly dystopian cybernetic settings. Today, we are talking about Drew's newest release, The Men of the Mountain, released earlier this March, and the audiobook is coming soon to Audible. At the moment, it is not quite out. At the moment that we are recording this, the book is not out. But if you hear me interrupt and say that the book is out, and the link is in the episode notes, listen to me. All right. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce to the show Drew Harrison. Drew, how are you doing?
I am doing pretty well today. I'm really excited to be talking because I've been looking forward to this for a while. And I'm happy to, dive in and start talking about the books. And I'm very excited to get this audiobook fully finalized. That should be out very, very soon. Yeah,
absolutely. It's going to be really, really exciting. It's been really fun, collaborating with you, making this story, into the audio medium. It's been a real fun process. But yeah, let's jump into this interview. And also, thank you for being here. I'm excited to have you here.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Well, let's start at the beginning. When did you know that writing was the medium for you?
So all along, I feel like I've always at least been media inclined. Ever since I was really, really young, I started working with video, and I'm about 10 or 12 years old. Yeah. The man my mother was dating at the time got me set up with a bootleg copy of Adobe Premiere and After Effects. And I was like, I want to make movies. So I would do lots of little home movies when I was a kid. And I had a lot of fun with that. And I would write up little scripts and we would shoot them. And I had a lot of fun with that as well. And it was always just something I kind of cultivated in the background. I actually started writing a big screenplay for what wanted to be my first feature-length movie. Right. When I was in high school, I started it. Okay. But I would have friends over and I'd read them excerpts from chapters, and they were my biggest hype men. They're like, yes, this is so good. Make this happen. Nice. But it hit a point when I was basically at a major turning point in the story where I was like, I'm just a high schooler. This is going to be a multi-million-dollar budget movie. I was like, I don't think I can actually see this project to fruition. And it was a bit of a reality check for a kid with big dreams, but that story stayed in the back of my head. It was always there percolating. Yeah. And when I went off to college, I ended up opting for journalism as a major. And I started learning all of the formal mechanics of actually writing stuff. So how to properly place a comma, style guidelines, verb tense consistency. And as I was soaking it up, in the back of my head, I was always like, I'd really like to go back to some of those stories that I wanted to tell a while ago, but now armed with a lot more professional knowledge, could I do justice by them? And so I graduated college. I had my major in journalism, but one of the points that my journalism professors were hammering into my head over and over and over again over the course of the career is journalism is a dying industry. That's what my professors were telling me. They were showing me the chart showing ad revenue just ticking down, down, down over time. So when I graduated, I wasn't super enthused with the idea of let me go work at like a dying news station in the middle of Duluth, Minnesota. So I decided I'm going to just start teaching for a while I figure out like a truer calling for me. And I actually started with tutoring as my main role, but that's a job that was like just nights and weekends. I had a lot of free time and I was like, there is that classic combo of the person who teaches and writes. And I was like, I've always had these story ideas that I wanted to tell. Let me try my hand at writing something. So I went back, I found my high school drafts of that first book project, or at the time it was a screenplay, but I'm like, I'm going to adapt this to be a novel instead. And so I spent a few months rewriting the beginning, writing all the way through to the end. I closed the book and I was like, whoa, that was actually pretty fun. This was gratifying. I sent it out to people to read. I actually printed it in this like really thick bound little, not like a professional book, but it had like a little spiral plastic rings. And I gave it out to my friends and they read it. And they had feedback and I was like, whoa, this is a rush. And so at that moment, I was kind of sold on maybe teaching and then writing books on the side. Like, no matter how ambitious my ideas were, you don't need $1 million budget to write an action scene in a book, right? Whereas if you want to film that as a movie, that's obviously a lot harder to do. So I really enjoyed the freedom that came with that, the ability to tell exactly the story that I wanted to tell and leave the expensive special effects for like the mind of the reader as they read through.
Yeah, totally.
And once I had that revelation and I'd completed my first project, there kind of wasn't any going back. One other small element of my journey that I think really pushed me in that direction is when I was still developing my skills as a writer in like college, I would often just post like flash fiction on Reddit and like comment threads or on like the writing prompt subreddit. And I think that a lot of the feedback that I got there, helped me hone my skills to what I think landed better with readers. And B, it was just like a wall of really encouraging, enthusiastic feedback. I kept getting people commenting, you should be a writer, you should be a writer, you should be a writer, please publish. And all of that, chorus of voices. It's hard to say no to like the collective will of, thousands and thousands and thousands of strangers. So
definitely
at a certain point, they convinced me.
Well, that encouragement certainly helps. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
And imagination is the lowest budget SFX, right? So.
So I really just allowed my vision to just roll crazy with it. Whereas when I was writing the first draft, a part of my mind was like, I need to keep this grounded for what I could reasonably produce as a high schooler with no resources. But when I was doing the rewrite, I was like, no, we're going to have a car chase here. We're going to have a bank heist here. And, none of that would have been possible.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think a deep down part of me wants to one day do something with film and entertainment, getting a book deal, like something adapted to TV or film. I'm sure every author has that dream, but that's where my dream started. So I'd like to have the chance to go there.
Well, you got to have a dream to make the goal for sure. So
yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I found producing audiobooks for my work so gratifying. It's obviously not quite the same as a movie, but just hearing like the additions that a talented actor can make when reading the book, the emotion they breathe into the lines, I have found that to be very gratifying. And it's like I said, it's on the path to a serious film adaptation. You're getting half the rush. You get to hear it even if you can't see the movie.
Yeah. It's like we'll see if this flags anything, but it's like that graphic audio tagline, a movie in your mind. So I definitely get it.
Absolutely.
And I totally hear you. I think, being part of like making audiobooks, like there's a lot of things I'd love to do voice work for, and audiobooks are still a fantastic place to like do it,
Exactly.
So it's a lot of fun. So I've been thinking about this question. I feel like it might be a little leading, but let's just go for it and let's see how it goes.
Sure. Absolutely. I'm not afraid.
Yeah, perfect. So like you mentioned earlier, and when I was doing a little bit of my research, I read that, you got your degree in journalism. And when it came to the reporting world, you wrote that you'd prefer to reimagine it. And, I think many people in our youths get really attached to what we study and end up working in a different field. I'm no different. But I guess I wanted to know from your perspective what it was like to switch your focus from journalism to creative writing and kind of how that transferred.
Yeah. So, firstly, the first answer that bubbles to mind is just so creatively liberating. Because when you're writing something journalistically, you are bound to standards of integrity. You have to
Yeah.
accurately report facts. And if you're writing a story of what happened for like a newspaper column and the plot ends anticlimactically,
Yeah.
there's always a part of my mind that's like, this isn't such a fun story, but my job is not to have fun. My job is to just relay what happened factually.
Right.
But once I was switching over to creative writing, it's really, really liberating to be able to just examine the arc of what's happening in the story I'm trying to tell and
Totally.
to perform surgery on it where needed, to drum up the drama, to make
Yeah.
for more exciting conclusions. It's just, I think, in a lot of ways, a lot more gratifying for me as a storyteller to have control over the story.
For
A
sure.
journalist obviously doesn't control the story. All they can do is the presentation, I guess. And even if the journalist is giving too much effort to how they want to present the story, now you're editorializing, you're putting slant, and that's something that you weren't really supposed to do anyways as a journalist either.
Right. Right.
So the short answer is switching from reporting of real world facts to moving over to creative storytelling is just really freeing. It
Yeah.
it definitely was a more fun way of writing for me, just because I've always enjoyed telling stories. I didn't say this earlier when I was going through my history, but I have distinct like fond childhood memories of like in middle school. I went to like my grandparents' beach house with some friends, and we would stay up till like 1 or 2 in the morning, where I was just like improvising a story because they're like, "Oh, tell a story," and then we had so many characters that would be recurring people, but I
Yeah.
would just kind of wing it on the fly and just make up these characters and these plot lines around these characters. And I had my
Nice.
captive audience of all my friends who were there in the bedroom, just
Yeah.
watching me tell the story. And ever since then, I've enjoyed storytelling.
Yeah.
So gratifying, freedom. I'll also say that in a way, starting as a journalist has brought some, maybe bad habits is the wrong word, but I feel somewhat chained by my own education and background because I still have that tendency to over research that a journalist is supposed to have.
Right.
As a journalist, we're taught to get in, assess the situation, fact find, collect information, and then synthesize into a story.
Right.
But for me, when I write, I will always spend maybe not quite as much time researching as writing, but it can get pretty close sometimes. Where,
Right.
like in The Men of the Mountain, I don't know how much spoilers we're having in here, but there's a portion where we're talking about the trajectory of like two spaceships that are
Yeah.
traveling, and one is ahead of the other. And I was actually I did some reading on calculating the relativistic effects of how fast ships would have to go. And then I was timing how long it would take for messages to send back and forth between them with special relativity, all
Yeah.
for like a single throwaway sentence that one character says, which is just giving the delay in communication. And most readers are going to have their eyes gloss right over it, and they're not going to
Right.
think twice about that detail. But I spent like an entire day trying to make sure that detail was right. I think
Nice.
that is like my boulder I push up as Sisyphus because of my background in journalism. I just feel obligated to research everything to the fullest extent that I can.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes just to the detriment of the creative momentum. But
Well, I can hear what you're saying, and I think that I can see that perspective. For me, when I was reading through, I really liked that. I mean, I know what you mean. Like functionally, it was like there's a delay.
yeah,
This is what happens, but the whole reason behind it was really nice to know. Like in college, I took like an astronomy class, so I learned about the Doppler effect. Right.
hmm
And so I feel like it kind of has something to do with that. It clicked in my mind. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think about that. I like that, so
yep. But then a part of
yeah.
a voice in the back of my mind is like, you could have just made up a number, and the readers are not going to know. No
Yeah.
mathematician's going to break out the whiteboard and check my calculations. But I just feel obligated to tell the truth,
I
as I guess
mean,
a good journalist should.
that's a good point. Well, and I feel like
Yeah.
you never know with like readers or audiences. Like audiences can be way smarter than you might expect. You might have that one person who's like, "Wait a second."
The math isn't mathin'. So it's
Exactly.
for that stickler that I tried to spend an entire day calculating everything. So hopefully, if they break out the numbers themselves, they won't find much to complain about. I can't vouch for 100% accuracy, but I try
Right.
to make sure that whenever something occurs to me where I'm like, oh, I should check this for authenticity, I usually do the deep dive, and I try to go that mile to make sure things line up.
Nice. Well, I feel like it makes your stories very immersive, just to throw that out there.
That is the hope. That's the
Yeah.
reason why I go through the labor. I want to make sure that no one is taken out when they're like, wait, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
I want to make sure they don't have that opportunity. Yeah.
But I can also see where it might feel like a detriment to your like schedule, right? It's
Mhm.
like I got to make something happen, and I'm spending a lot of time
I need to
on
hit my
this.
writing target for today. And when I'm lost in the rabbit hole of pulling up equations for special relativity, it's like I've clearly lost the plot at that point. Yeah.
That's funny. So, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your inspirations. You know, obviously, creativity has been a big part of your growing up. And I guess I just wanted to know, like, what works would you say have inspired your writing the most?
Yeah. So when I was young and first started reading books, it was in middle school. And my parents tried to like get me on adult books instead of kids' books at the time. And they the first author I really was given a lot of exposure to was Stephen King.
Oh,
Because I'd had a friend that had just read Stephen King, and I was like, whoa, he read a grown-up book. I want to read that too.
yeah,
And so I read like Pet Cemetery, which in some scenes is a little traumatizing for young me, but also it's like,
sure.
whoa, this is the world of like adult entertainment because I'd only been exposed to like, young adult writing before.
Sure.
So I just went on like a Stephen King binge, and I've read more King than just about any author at this point. And that first story that I was telling, that the screenplay that became my first book that I finished, is actually kind of pretty heavily based on some of the vibes that come with Stephen King stories. It's not horror, but it's set in a very, very small town, and the small town is reckoning with events that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And a lot of Stephen King's books have that sort of bend to them.
Yeah.
It felt a little bit like a love letter to kind of like 80s sci-fi and Stephen King books
Yeah.
and all of that all at once. But I have found that ever since then, and even till this day, whatever I'm reading at the time has an effect to kind of manifest a little bit in my work.
For sure.
I feel like a forensic editor could go through my published books and they could look at each one and make some pretty good guesses about what I was consuming at the time that I wrote it.
Yeah.
My very first book, the first book I published, which is not the first one I wrote. In fact, that first one I was talking about that started as a screenplay is not yet published. I might publish it one day.
Nice.
But the first one I published, I had written just after I've read like most of Brandon Sanderson's fantasy series.
Yeah.
And I really liked the way that he took fantasy and made it very approachable with like these hard magic systems. And I was like, that's
Yeah.
kind of fun. I want to try a transposition of that into the genre of sci-fi.
Yeah.
And so the first book that I wrote and published kind of feels a little bit like What If Brandon Sanderson, but in the world of like a cyberpunk city, basically.
Yeah.
So it's the influences there are kind of undeniable. But then after I wrote that, I was reading through the first Law series by Abercrombie and the follow up, and as I'm reading them, I really love the way Abercrombie would write certain sentences. Like all of his chapters end with such like zippy zinger lines where I'm like, whoa, this is a really sharp way of writing. I want to do some of that too. And then I tried to work a little bit more of that into my own writing.
Yeah.
The Men of the Mountain, when I was writing it, I had recently read The Will of the Many, and that one by Eilington is told in the first person perspective. And I was like, whoa, this is a really good way to ensure there's not much distance between the reader and the actual narrative. It makes you feel like you're experiencing it with the reader.
Right.
And so I feel like a little bit of The Will of the Many's writing style kind of bled into this book because I was thinking, wow, this was effective in one avenue. Let me try to incorporate what I liked from that work into my own. I think when I'm reading, I obviously am there to have fun. I'm there to enjoy the stories, but I also try to look at it from the perspective of this is a craft I enjoy doing, and these are the experts at work. These are the masters of the craft. I have to take lessons from them. And so whenever I see something that feels effective, I just have this tendency to try to take my lessons and incorporate them as best I can.
Totally. And I think that's like a great method for growth and challenging yourself as well. I mean, you know, I guess that makes me wonder, and this doesn't necessarily have to be a question, but like, you know, was there ever, or like, may you have had the experience where you really liked something that a writer did stylistically that you tried and like didn't quite work for you?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. And I don't really know that I've ever had a failed experiment like that, just
Sure.
because I think the elements that I latch onto are ones that I feel like I already know would work well for the stories I'm trying to tell.
Totally.
I have read things where I'm like, oh, this is good, but this is not my genre. I'm not going to try to write something like this. And so I have not tried to incorporate those elements.
Totally fair.
But I think at least I've been relatively choosy about the aspects that I try to incorporate,
Totally.
which has at least meant no catastrophic failures. As far as I'm aware, for all I know, maybe the readers absolutely despise a certain thing I'm doing.
Oh.
They haven't told me. Who knows?
Yeah, I doesn't sound like it to me. And what is failure really? So,
I mean, I feel like with the arts, there isn't really such a thing as failure. I've heard it said that like there aren't really bad books. Every book has its audience, but the question is, can the audience that book would appeal to ever even find it? How do you reach them?
Right.
But I think that you, as like a thought experiment, anyone listening to this, if you think of like your favorite book of all time and you go to like the Goodreads for that book, you will find 1-star reviews absolutely slamming the book that you love. And some of them will be making some legitimate points, but it's just because there's not a good fit between what that reader was looking for and what the book had to offer.
Totally makes sense. Yeah. So I guess switching gears, moving forward a little bit as well, most of your writing seems to have this futuristic cyberpunk flair. And do you think that stories in this genre are better vehicles for thought leadership, or perhaps just better food for thought in our increasingly technologic age?
The short answer is yes, I do. Because I feel like right now our society is at a bit of an inflection point where the way things have been historically doesn't provide a good way to predict where things are going. I think that you're looking at acceleration in a lot of different technological avenues and imagining what comes next and deciding how should we process the problems that our society is facing. If you're looking at the past, I don't think you're going to find the answers that we need. I do think sci-fi is a bit like innately pessimistic, and that's something that's kind of required by the genre because we're setting our stories in the future. We need to have conflict in our stories for them to be interesting. And that means we're kind of forced to be forecasting conflict in the future. Like I said, it's a bit pessimistic, but I do think that pessimism can have some value in a similar way to how some people sometimes say like anxiety has some value as a human being. There's a reason we evolved to have anxiety. It makes sure that, if there's like a snake in the bush, we don't approach that bush. We're afraid of the snake so we don't get bit. I think that having this wariness about where we're going ensures that we don't get bit by the snakes that right now we ourselves are building. I think that we have a lot of current directions that we're developing that have a lot of dangers, and I feel like we're not taking all of those dangers seriously enough. I'm of the belief that AI specifically is like the largest existential risk humanity may have ever faced, perhaps since we were developing our atomic bombs. I don't know if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, but I enjoyed when they had that scene where they're like, when we do this test, we might just light the whole atmosphere on fire. And they decided, well, the needs of the war are so great, we have to take this risk, even if we think there's a chance it could destroy everything. And when I think back at that moment, I'm like affronted. I'm like, how dare those people have taken that risk to end everything just on the justification that they needed this bomb developed right then and now. And for all the outrage I feel that they risk so much, I feel like right now we as humanity are once again flirting with disaster when we're developing systems that can be potentially better than humans at everything humans do, to the point where they wouldn't necessarily need humans anymore. And I just, in some ways, am a little bit anxious about that future. I imagine that when we as humans want to build our roadways, we don't really consult the ants in the anthill we bulldoze as we're building that road, because there is such a gulf between what we as humans are and what ants can understand that we don't even think it worth the time to ask them. And I'm imagining when we are developing entities that theoretically for our future could be so much smarter than we are as we are to ants, it's like, why do we think that they're going to consult with us before they do whatever they want to do? So in some ways you can call me a little bit of a technologic doomer, but I feel like we need some doomerism to make sure that we are checking the risks. We want to make sure that we are paying attention to where this all could be marching. I'll say that the Men of the Mountain specifically doesn't dwell on AI Doom because I feel like I wrote a lot of AI Doom into Starfall. That was the first one I published. And then Early Adopter is a collection of short stories that also tried to examine it from a few different bends. But after writing those two, I was like, all right, let me do something more fun. Let me do something different. Let me set a story in the far future. And I wasn't engaging with those specific themes. But I think the number one tool in managing risky behavior is just knowledge of that risk. I think that like information is power. And through sci-fi, I try to at least spend some energy educating people about the risks that we're facing. I try to present it in a way that is grounded and based on actual science instead of just like fear mongering to make sure that the people reading it walk away pondering like, I guess I never really gave thought to the way that such and such works. Maybe this is something we need to be paying attention to. Totally. There's a bit of a weird connection that just came to mind right now. At the moment this is being recorded, there is a bit of an Ebola outbreak going on in Africa right now. And the reason why it is such a big problem in that region is there are these burial customs for the cultures down there where when someone dies, the family and the community will often spend a lot of time with the body. They do all the dressing. It's part of their ritualistic customs. And I think that there's not a lot of education about germ theory. So these people are spending time with the people who have died of Ebola, and then they themselves are contracting Ebola, and the outbreak is self-sustaining. Where I think that if you had disseminated information more effectively, if you'd let people know, hey, this ritual and custom that you obviously have a lot of reason to love is also perpetuating harm, then those people armed with that information can start making more informed decisions for the community safety.
Totally.
It's just, I think arming people with information is very important. I think that's another spillover effect for my background in journalism, but making sure that people are informed of risk, I think is the best way to mitigate risk. Totally. And I think that humanity for a long time has not really done a good job at staying on top of our risks. I don't know if you've ever seen that dumb Twitter screenshot where it was like a researcher says, we have finally finished building the Torment Nexus from the beloved sci-fi classic, Don't Build the Torment Nexus. And it's like, we've had people shouting our warnings for most of history, and I think a lot of people ignore it, but I'm going to still join the chorus of voices trying to shout those warnings. I'm going to be one of the people saying, don't build the Torment Nexus. And if people go on to build it, I guess it's not my problem anymore. I've done my best.
But think how much money the shareholders could have from the Torment Nexus.
Yeah, someone will get rich.
Yeah.
That's the. I think it's a universal human constant that people kind of tend to be pretty short-sighted. I think people are looking on their short-term future, and that's why I've been drawn to sci-fi. By writing about the future, I feel like we're able to at least direct people's attention a bit further ahead than they might be looking right now.
Totally. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, man. There's like 4 or 5 things that just kind of, my brain snags on, hearing you talk about this stuff, like having it be really important to have like education, to inform people about things going wrong. Obviously there's misinformation out there, right? So people be like, no, don't listen to them. They're doing something wrong,
My first published book is the book Starfall was my COVID project actually. Nice. And one of the main dominant themes of this book was AI being used for the purposes of mass manipulation. And when I was writing this book, it was again 2020, my COVID project. I was writing about this far off, distant, dystopian future where AI will be able to start making our art. It can make paintings, it can write books. Yeah. And I was thinking, wow, that'll be a crazy future when it comes true in like 4 decades. Right. And then I had this manuscript finished in 2020, and like 2021 is when OpenAI announces here this new thing called ChatGPT. And then they're like, we have this new thing called DALL-E, which will make pictures for whatever you type. And I remember having this moment where I was like pulling my hair, like this wasn't supposed to happen so soon. Yeah. Our society is not largely ready for this. Yeah. And each subsequent model that's enhanced its capabilities of creating useful content has also become much more efficient at creating problematic and manipulative content. And everyone has seen manipulation campaigns happening on just about any place that people interact digitally. Yep. You'll get so much misinformation, people making images of people doing things they never did, or whatever nonsense evidence they want to create to back up their points. So it is a huge, huge problem. And I think that socially, we just don't have good solutions for the risk this technology poses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It kind of feels like that reminds me of the saying in Jurassic Park with Dr. Ian Malcolm, like spent so much time wondering if you could, you never thought if you should. And
Exactly right.
yeah. And, I think also kind of going back to like education is more important than, in a sense, like more important than like abstinence, right? Like I know there's been some issues with like DARE when they're like, if you do drugs once, you will die. And a kid tries like smoking weed and he's like, oh, I didn't
And they're
die,
like, wait, I
actually.
didn't die.
It was like, actually, I was
Yeah.
kind of fucking sick. Let's
And
move
then
on to
they're
something
like,
else.
yeah, they're like, huh,
Yeah.
if I was lied to about this one thing, then maybe everything they told me is a lie. And then
Yeah.
that erodes trust in public authorities. And that I think is another parallel problem to what you were talking about. Not only do we have so much misinformation, but I think public trust in institutions is at the lowest I can ever remember it being in my life. You have this like widespread skepticism going around.
Totally.
And I think that it just creates this climate where nobody can even agree on a consensus of reality anymore. And you can't hold society's social fabric together when you have such a fundamental disconnect in people's belief of what society even is. So it's yet another reason why I feel a little bit pessimistic about the current state of affairs. And I do wonder if some of that pessimism of the modern age is why I'm so interested in science fiction for all the reasons I've mentioned so far.
I mean, totally. And, I guess that reminds me of one of the things I hooked on to, because it is easy to be very pessimistic about stuff. Like, I'm not, ironically, for being an audiobook producer, like, I don't do a ton of recreational reading. But I really love like tabletop games. So like I play lots of D&D. Call of Cthulhu is my absolute favorite. And then I've started playing Cyberpunk recently. And reading into the Cyberpunk lore is terrifying. It's like, oh, we're living Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
We're
marching on that path right now.
Like, when can I get my RGB like implant on my face? Like,
give it 5 years.
Yeah.
With like what Neuralink already being an actual reality instead of a sci-fi plot point is like, we're pretty close to that already.
Oh yeah. And if you're not familiar with this for the listeners, if the listeners aren't familiar with the Cyberpunk universe, like, you could check it out. You're not going to feel great, but you can check it out.
I think what makes it feel not great is just when you start looking at all the parallels between where we're at, where we're going, and what was supposed to be just the dystopia that sci-fi authors dreamt up as hopefully we'll never go here. Yeah. It's like, wait, we're getting really close to there already.
Yeah. It's like, oh, wow, this water is quite warm.
Yeah. So the frog boiling in the pot of water was something that in my first book, Starfall, the Cyberpunk book, it actually comes up as a recurring motif at a few points where like characters are realizing things got worse and worse slowly but slowly. And then they realized, wait, we're boiling now. We should have done something about this a long time ago.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, that was a fantastic answer to that question. I was worried that would be too leading, but I think that was great.
Thank you.
But let's move forward here. So after this discussion, why the Halcyon Crisis?
Yeah.
What prompted you to write a contemporary crime thriller?
Yeah, whenever I'm doing my little table on author events, I always say sci-fi, 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 and here's the black sheep of the family. This one's an action thriller. But after doing so many like heavy projects, I was like, I want to do something where I could just switch off the brain and write something fun. I was writing what felt like as I was writing it, like it'd be a Michael Bay movie, not something that you're supposed to take very seriously.
Totally.
I'm from South Florida, and growing up, we would always go on cruise ships as family vacations. Yeah. And while we're on those cruise ships, sometimes just as like an interesting discussion, thought experiment, we'd like, what if pirates sailed up? What mitigation tactics does this ship even have? How would they handle it? And just from those conversations, slowly over the course of several vacations, I started playing around with the idea of, this would actually be a kind of fun movie. Yeah. Just, pirates on a cruise ship. It pressed like the fun buttons in my brain, just like how it just felt like Die Hard, but in a very novel setting where you have like, a takeover. You might have like someone trying to do good, but hiding from the people who are taking over the venue. And I was like, yeah, that would be fun if I one day made a movie out of it. Yeah. But then once I switched to book writing, I had a moment where I was like, yeah, that movie idea I was always playing around with. I can just slam this out over a single summer and not really have to spend too much time in drafting and researching and doing my due diligence and calculating relativistic effects for moving spaceships.
Sure,
Let me just write a fun movie that you turn off your brain for. So it was a single summer spent writing it. And by the end, I was like, okay, yeah, this is fun. I'll throw it online. It's the one book that I haven't really spent any energy promoting just because of how different it is from my other work. But I've had a lot of people who have read all of my, what I consider main books. They're like, oh, I want to read more. And then they read that one. They're like, yeah, that was fun. It was cool. It was a good, one said it was a great like way to spend an airplane ride. They just read through it end to end. And so it's really not meant to be that serious. It was something that I just did to kill some time between the meatier, more substantive books I was writing.
Well, for sure. And you know what is important, even in like some of these pessimistic times, is just having fun. You know, you gotta have fun. Why not have an awesome action crime thriller on a cruise ship? Why not?
Yeah,
you know? We could use that.
I agree. Unless you're on the cruise ship, you don't want any pirates attacking you. But I think it's fun. It's not meant to be taken seriously.
For sure. Well, thank you for that answer. The next question I got for you is, what is your writing process like? Do you have any special rituals to get you in the zone?
Yes, I do. First and maybe most important for me is that I have never been so good at remaining productive at home. When I'm in my home environment, I have too many distractions. I spend a lot of time at leisure in home. So trying to write in home, I'll inevitably get sidetracked. So what I would usually do is I make a circuit of all of my like local coffee shops. On a writing day, I'll arrive at a coffee shop like around like noon or so, and I'll be sipping at a gigantic drink and I'll be tapping away, and I try to hit my word count goal. Every writing day, I aim for about 2,000 words at a minimum, but if I feel the story is moving quickly, I'll just go until the momentum stops. My number one record for a single day was actually 10,000 words, but that is far and beyond what it normally is. But usually I can at least hit my 2K, and then I call that a day. And it's actually meant that a lot of the coffee shops in my area, they know me by my face. They know my order and everything. And I'll just set up, I'll write. And in a bunch of them, I actually, if they have like bookshelves, some of my books are on the shelf with a little sticker like written in this coffee shop, because that's where most of the writing, actually the magic happens. And then even when the draft is done, when it comes time to like edit and get my book into sharper shape, I'll also generally do that at the coffee shops as well.
Nice. That's awesome. Got any coffee shops you want to shout out?
I'm a big fan of Sip Java Co. in Fort Lauderdale. That's probably where most of the Men of the Mountain came together specifically, but different books have had different locations that I've spent more time at. In fact, sometimes when I think about writing a book, like a flavor of a certain coffee drink will come to mind because it's just so strongly associated with it.
That's super interesting. So like, you switch up your coffee order then, right?
Yeah, periodically. If it's like it's time for a change. And when I'm starting a new project, sometimes I'll also try to change the locations that I frequent just to make it feel like a fresher start.
That's super interesting. Nice. Very cool, I guess.
I've heard people say like, if you break up with a partner, you should change your perfume and your ringtone so that it feels like a new start. And it's like when I'm changing my book project, I want to change up my coffee shops. I want to change up my order. So it feels like I'm starting fresh, basically.
Nice. I like that. That's so interesting. What's the coffee order for Men of the Mountain?
So for the Men of the Mountain, when I was writing it at that coffee shop, Sip Java Co., I would always go for, they have a thing called Good Karma, which is like, it was a big latte with like a caramel and a vanilla syrup. But then I would add cold foam, and into the cold foam, they would put like a cookie dough syrup.
Oh, wow.
So absolute diabetic nightmare, very sugary, but I just got hooked on it while I was writing it. And that's the one that comes to mind when I think of what I was drinking while I wrote that book.
That's awesome. Nice.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. It sounds like it. I drink most of my coffee black. I'm joyless.
What about joyless? I think that there is a certain elegance to like a good roast. In fact, there's a coffee shop that I also frequent called Wells Coffee in my area in Fort Lauderdale, and they have really, really good high quality coffee beans that they roast on premises in this like gigantic coffee roaster that looks like a steam engine on a train. And whenever you walk in, since they're roasting it, it's in the air. When I leave, it's on my clothes. I smell like coffee for the rest of the day. But if there were any shop around here that I drink it black occasionally from, it's Wells. They got good stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. It's true. Having a nice roast is really important, especially when drinking the coffee black, for sure. For sure.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess to end that that line of thought, it's I'll do my writing in my shops.
Yeah.
When the book is finished, I always take a few months off because I want to step away from the project so I can come back to it with a fresh set of eyes. How long it is will depend on how busy things are in the rest of my life.
Sure.
But usually at least 2 or 3 months. And then when I come back, that's when I start the editing. I do my first rounds of edits myself because, like I said before, I have that formal background in actual copy editing. I do feel like I can catch the grammar errors myself.
Yeah.
But then once I finish that first round of edits, I usually send it out to a bunch of people to do some early like beta or alpha reading, depending on how finalized I feel like it is. Right. And then when I collect all that feedback, I then make more editorial modifications if I want to advance the plot line here or there or change how a scene unfolds.
Right.
But I save that until after people have read it and give their thoughts.
Right. That makes sense. Always coming back with fresh eyes. I think it's an important thing to do when coming back to the work, for sure.
I find that if I don't space it out, I just have no ability to edit it objectively. And as a result, I think like if I remember writing the sentence recently enough, my brain sort of recalls what the sentence is supposed to be. And so even if I didn't write it that way because I flubbed a word or something, my brain will read what I meant, not what I actually wrote. Yeah. When I come back months later, I actually sometimes am surprised by the way that scenes twist and turns because I've forgotten the fine details, but I remember the broad strokes. Right. And that makes it a lot easier to catch the errors.
Totally. No, it definitely makes sense. This makes me think of another saying, and it's not really going to be a saying when I say it, but like the idea that it's like from a bird's eye view, things are a lot clearer, right? So just kind of getting out of that story and getting to look at it more as a whole, and again with the fresh eyes, totally makes great sense. I just want to put a little pin here for a moment. It seems like we have a lot more questions to go, and maybe like 25 minutes. So depending on how available you are, I don't mind running over an hour. I've been really enjoying this conversation.
Totally up to you. I'm also, if you want to skip around a bit, I'm happy to do that. But I have nothing lined up for today until 4:30 my time, so happy to stretch past as well.
Okay, sounds good. Let's maybe aim for the half-hour mark to the next hour. Okay. If that makes sense.
Sure.
However it goes. 3 hours apart. And then maybe what we can even do is have like an extended edition. If need be, I don't know how necessary it is to.
Yeah. So we'll let it go. I'm not so as long as you want it to go on for, happy to stick around. If it's easier to just let it go rather than targeting a specific time. Yeah. On a related note to this, like when I'm writing, if I like am targeting a certain word count, I feel like I'm like truncating and rushing to try to hit that goal. Whereas sometimes I'm just like, I'm okay with this book being between A and B and just let it kind of arc and see where it lands.
Just however many words you need to get to A to B, right? And just let that come naturally. So I'm good with that too, but I just want to double check with you, make sure that, we're not running too far over, but I got some time as well. So awesome. I like, similar to what you were saying is I work from home and it is hard to work from home sometimes. So I really try to be like use time to be like, hey, I got to go do something else. Because then otherwise I'll, get stuck doing laundry and listening to podcasts or something. So that's just how it goes. Great. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Men of the Mountain. And when it comes to spoilers, I'm okay to have as many spoilers as you are. I think all we'll do is just be like, spoiler warning. And I can even do that like during editing or something.
Yeah, I'm happy to call out spoilers before I say them.
Perfect.
And I'm going to avoid spoiling too much, but the book itself, obviously it starts feeling like it's one genre, and then over the course of that story it reveals itself to be a little bit more sci-fi than it at first might seem. But we've been spending so long talking about sci-fi, that ship has sailed. I'm gonna talk about it in its true sci-fi self, not the fantasy book that it seems like you're starting.
For sure. Great. Well, I guess with that, what inspired the main premise of this story?
So one thing that I remember leading to like the first bits of this idea in my head was I'm a fan of, there's a video game, Horizon Zero Dawn, which is set in like a far distant future after humanity has collapsed. And you play as a protagonist who runs around with a bow and arrow, but battling these like robotic dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about it was this clash of like the old versus the new. You had this like these robots which are very advanced, and you had these like buried bunkers with really cool technology, and then you have this tribal primitivism. And I thought like the contrast between them was a really interesting thing to explore, because it lets you explore technology from the perspective of someone who is so far removed from technology that it seems like it's basically magic. In fact, there's a common sci-fi trope, Clarke's third law. I think it's Clarke's third law, or maybe I'm mixing whose it is. I think it's Arthur Clarke's, which is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And it's just been something that I really enjoyed running with in this book, because you have a protagonist who's raised from a tribal society looking at technology, and how could you process that if not just saying that this is magic?
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the challenge of writing from that limited perspective and trying to puzzle out, how would they see this? How would they name it with the nomenclature and terminology they have so far in their life? Yeah. And I found it a very fun perspective to write from.
Absolutely.
I had always, when I wrote my first book, Starfall, that one ends kind of turning towards spacefaring. And I wanted to write a far future follow-up to that book about like a colony that was established somewhere in the stars, but it had somehow failed. And it was about like investigations into that. And I started playing around with this idea of like a far future colony beyond its, functional time period. And what might it be like? What might be left over after a colony fails? Right. And that was like a playground that I was just toying with ideas in. I was like, oh, maybe there was like a different story unrelated to the first book that I published, where I would have more freedom in how I want to set things up, and it could be a fun story. Yeah. And from that, just like more and more little ideas glommed onto it. I feel like when I come up with a book idea, it's like I'll come up with premise, then I'll come up with like certain scenes, and then I'll come up with characters, and I'll figure how do I make this puzzle piece fit together. And then before too long, I had an outline. So
nice.
The rest is process. The rest is coffee shops and editing.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And it was a lot of fun as a reader too. Like, because as more of the sci-fi elements unfold, and as there are some technologies that like, you or I as readers or like the audience would be familiar with, it's really funny to hear the characters be unfamiliar with it and be like, something that's just makes so much logical sense for us doesn't quite click for them. They're like, that idea is silly. And it's like,
yeah.
Like,
I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with every one of those moments. As I'm writing it, you can imagine me chuckling to myself of just like, they wouldn't get that. And that would be a fun bit of it. It's like dramatic irony on behalf of the reader when you know something, but the characters don't know it. Yeah. And then you get to see them looking at it as an outsider. It's been enjoyable to inhabit that space.
Totally. And it's enjoyable to read it for sure.
That's the hope. That's the
Yeah, the next question that I have for you is, Cade suffers the hero's journey from a different perspective. I guess I've learned this recently, that others find him more capable than he finds himself, and part of his becoming is starting to see himself how others see him. Why is this important for this story?
I think that's a very good question. And it's when I was trying to mock out all of my characters, I did spend a lot of time trying to, I'm always an outliner. I want to like engineer most of the story before I start. And I spent a while locking in on this particular choice. But I think that when reading a story, I feel like the audience needs a certain amount of buy-in through like authenticity in characters. And especially when you're going through a first person narrative, you're getting in the head of that character. I think that it needs to be believably inhabitable for the reader to really stick with what's going on. You don't want them to be like too perfect, too flawless, because we want them to feel human, and humans generally are not perfect or flawless. Everybody's got there's something. And I just wanted to make sure that this character felt like they had a very real mindset that you were inhabiting when you're reading their first person thoughts. I did this, I did that. I wanted to make sure that that line of thinking felt very, easy to identify with, as opposed to being something that is just so far removed from normal humanity. Like right now, the stories or the books that I'm reading belong to a series called The Sun Eater, which I've been enjoying the books, but the main character, his name is Hadrian Marlowe. He's telling the story in first person, but this character is like a Greek marble bust of a man. Like, he doesn't feel like a real person. He waxes poetic. He's melodramatic. He is, like, in all accounts, like a flawless hero anointed by a god. And when you're reading like his first person accounting, it's not a very easy headspace for me as a listener and reader to slot into, because I am not that person. There's a big gulf between the human that I am and, like I said, the marble statue that viewpoint character is. And I wanted to make sure that when I was writing it, there wasn't that distance. I wanted to make sure that he felt approachable, that he felt normal. He is plagued by insecurities, because I think a lot of humans out there, a lot of people, maybe even listening, feel insecure in some way or another.
Oh, sure.
He is thrust into a role that he doesn't feel ready for. And I wanted to make sure that he doesn't just say, like, okay, well, guess I'm the leader now. I wanted him to have those moments of doubt where he's lifted up by people around him, because I think most people listening have a moment in their life when they feel not ready and they're lifted up by people around them. Maybe the short answer is I wanted people to identify with this viewpoint. I wanted people to feel like this is a human viewpoint instead of like an archetype to fit a story role, if that makes sense.
Totally. Absolutely.
And I hope by the end it makes their journey into coming into himself a little bit. I hope it makes it a little bit more satisfying and fulfilling, because you feel like it starts in a position that maybe the listener can identify with, and it ends to them finding their stride. It is in a way a bit of a coming of age story for the main character. And I wanted just to take the reader on like a realistic coming of age arc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, through narrating it, like I felt that, like, through, you know, your prose, or like the way that like he speaks about himself, about what's going on, like it does change throughout the book, and you feel that change as you go through. So it does feel like very organic.
Then I would count that to be hopefully that, you know, job accomplished, because that was my goal when setting out to write him. I wanted to make sure that was the impression.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very fun character to play. I enjoyed him.
I think he did a really, really good job. And to what you were saying, I think by the end, you can almost hear some of the transformation in the way that you were reading the lines. I think that early on, the reader can pick up on some of that uncertainty. And then as the story goes on, I feel like you did a good job at projecting more and more of the confidence. I'm really excited to get the audiobook out there, because I do think that you know, knocked it out of the park.
Wow.
It's a really, really solid performance.
I really appreciate that. That means a lot. Thank you. So moving on to the next question is, you do a fantastic job at keeping optimism on the edge of a knife. Why is it important to keep optimism in bleak settings, but also why is depicting bleak worlds necessary? And we might have touched on this a little bit.
We ran tangential to this, but I actually, just to I guess address the extra points I wanted to add. I think the last part first, you said, why is depicting bleak worlds necessary? And I think that does tie back to what we were talking about, sci-fi as like a cautionary tale, as a means of hopefully course correction as people are brought to realize the risks we're facing. But I do think it is important to keep optimism. And I wanted to make the character of Cade relatively optimistic. And that is something that I have felt strongly about since the beginning of the project, because I think sometimes you can overdo it a little bit with the pessimism. We read and we watch TV and movie for escapism. And I think that if our escapism is like worse than the real world, we're not going to want to escape there anymore. I remember that a while ago, I tried to watch the show The Handmaid's Tale with a friend of mine, based on the books by Atwood. And pretty early on, I remember just in the first season, there was some horrifying scene going on. And I just look at my friend and he looks at me and we have this look of like, why are we spending our time watching everybody be so miserable in a fictionalized, miserable world that I would hope would never come to fruition? I think that the work definitely already had served its purpose to us as like pointing out, hey, there are particular gender dynamics that could be very harmful. But once I got that, I was like, all right, I don't need to experience any more of this misery. I wanted to turn to other media. I feel like when it comes to dystopian media, it is very, very easy to just hammer the reader or viewer over the head with the same miserable note over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But they're not going to want to read that book. They're not going to want to spend time in that universe.
Totally.
So if sci-fi is to serve its purpose as being something that steers us towards a brighter path, I think it requires a belief in that brighter path. We have to make sure that the reader walks away thinking there is still hope. There is a way that we can right the ship. And so that's why when I was writing, I always thought it was very important to have that through line of even though things might be bad, there is a possible good future in store.
Totally.
And that in Men of the Mountain is Cade's optimism. In my anthology of short stories, Early Adopter, some of them are bleak, but I put some that are uplifting and happy because I wanted the reader to read, okay, maybe there is potentially a poignant way through this. And it's when I talk about the anthology Early Adopter, I keep looking offside because I have it right here. This is that one. Nice. I sometimes pitch it to people as like Black Mirror. But Black Mirror as a TV show, I feel like falls into the pessimism trap where 99% of the episodes are really dour and glum. And when you watch them, you feel bad. But I remember they have at least one or two that are really profound and beautiful. Like there was the one that was about people going into like a digital afterlife. And I guess at first that already kind of sounds pretty bleak, but by the end, it ended on a really profound note. And I remember after I was finishing that episode, I was like, whoa, this made me feel some emotions. And it made me feel like, okay, I can handle another few bleak episodes if every now and again I get the uplifting episode.
That's right. That makes sense.
So I feel like you need that optimism. Otherwise, instead of it being cautionary, it's just depressing.
Totally. Yeah. Too easy to give in to despair.
Exactly. Especially if you keep heaping more and more despair on the person as they go through the work.
Absolutely. That makes good sense. Well, I guess this is also somewhat tangential, but what do you think is the role of the doomed hero? We have a couple of doomed heroes in Men of the Mountain.
Yes, and I'm going to try to answer it without spoiling here, just because this one feels like it could be slightly more sensitive, but there are a couple characters that might plausibly fit that role. And when I was setting out to like write these characters, I wanted to focus on other elements of their drama over the course of the plot. And I think that as soon as you forecast to the reader that this character fills the role of the doomed hero, I think it allows us to stop focusing on the, oh, will they or won't they make it? And instead focus on the other interesting parts of their journey. Because the reader kind of knows, they see the neon sign. If they're genre savvy, they know where this particular arc is going. And so I think they start to then ask themselves different questions like, how will the characters carry on when this character is no longer able to guide them? It changes the way that we're anticipating the turns of the plot ahead. And it was an interesting device to toy around with. And I do think that it's only the genre savvy readers that are going to really see the neon flashing signs. I think it's easy to just follow along with the plot, not think too deeply, and, you know, maybe be surprised by some character departures. But for the readers who know it's coming, I think it also gives this sense of like looming danger, like, you know, in the distance that there is some threat. And I think that does a little bit to add to some tension in the earlier acts when you get the feeling that this character is in a precarious position. Totally. Managing tension in a first-person book like Men of the Mountain was an interesting challenge because all my previous books that I'd written before had been like third-person or third-person omniscient versus limited, and I had the ability to hop around from here's one scene with our protagonist, now here's a scene with the antagonist, and by jumping back and forth, you can kind of keep escalating that tension. But in Men of the Mountain, where it's first-person, where the only events the reader knows are the events that Cade himself's witnessing, I felt like I was relying a little bit on extrinsic factors to the story to build some tension early on, where the reader is thinking about things that maybe Cade isn't thinking about, and that might lead to some early tension.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think this would be any spoiler at all, but, you know, every chapter you kind of start with a little insert, a little information, a blurb, that I think really helps color the story more, and just do like what you were saying is like, it makes you think about stuff that Cade's not thinking about and sort of fills out this sort of picture and themes as the book unravels.
Yeah. So epigraphs are a thing that when I was reading in middle school, Stephen King used to do a lot of epigraphs, but he would do it at like big chunks of his books. Like if there's like a part 1, part 2, part 3, he'd throw them at each of the major dividers. And then Brandon Sanderson, whom I read a lot of in like college, he did lots of epigraphs too, but his epigraphs are generally pretty small. I really like them as a tool for, like you had said, not only fleshing out the world a little bit to make the setting feel more plausible, but I think it can be used for dramatic irony, in the sense that the characters are not privy to information that the reader has. And with that extra information, the reader can sometimes get a new lens on a scene that's different from what the character can see with their limited amount of information. And it's a device that I enjoy playing with. I feel like it is in some circles seen as kind of lazy writing, because I'm trying to get the benefit of world building without needing to seed it cleverly within an unfolding plot. But one thing that I always disliked is when that sort of world building is done very clumsily. It can take me out of a story. Like if a character stops to explain something to another character that they both should know in their world, I'm pulled out of a story. I would almost rather have just dropped that information to the reader. It's like, hey, me, the author, telling you this is an interesting little tidbit. But the characters don't have to pause and explain.
Totally.
Like a random egregious example that surfaced to my mind right away is in the first season of the TV series Game of Thrones, not the books, but in the TV series, the very first line out of Jaime Lannister looking at his sister, Cersei Lannister, he says, "As your brother, it's my job to tell you, you worry too much." He just has to say in his first line of dialogue, as your brother, I need to tell you, you worry too much. It's like, the writer saying, nudge, nudge, these are brother, sister. But it's like, it just feels like it takes you out of the moment, because it's something that they try to incorporate into a scene, but it feels stilted. I have enjoyed the freedom of just kind of peppering it into this thing that is totally external to the story. But in a way is not as external to the story as it seems, because by the end, there is a plausible way that could have been part of the story. Without going into spoiler territory, though. But there is a way that that information is meant to be provided to the person reading the book.
Totally. Yeah. And it was funny, just as you were going with your example, it's like, like the shows where they're like, "Hey sis, how have you been since mom died? It's been 10 years since mom died. How are you holding up?"
Exactly. Like, that's when it's done poorly. And so epigraphs give me a good way to sidestep that risk. And that's why it's a device I've enjoyed.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's well done. That's what I'm gonna say.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
And it's funny too. Epigraph. I've learned a word today. Fantastic.
There we go. There we go. Stick around with writers. You'll learn all sorts of fun little craft words.
Yeah. Right. Oh, that's funny. That's a. It makes me think about talking about like my experience with writing and reading and literacy, but I don't know if that's really.
Have you done much writing?
When writing, I've only really written for TTRPGs. So I just I just write scenarios. So I'm like, this is kind of our world. This is the moving pieces. These are certain people with certain wants and wishes. They're going to do this. What are my characters going to do? Like, this is what they can interact with. And I try to keep things loose enough so that, you never know what your friends are going to do. So yeah,
it's very funny you mentioned that, because I forgot this part of my own narrative as to how I became an author. But very important for my path was also that when I was in college, I DM'd for a D&D campaign for a while. And what I would do is I would pepper the world with like in-universe writings. And some of the writings would be like little stories that I write that might actually be foreshadowing for plot points. They would be world building scraps, a little bit like the epigraphs that I've worked into my later books. And writing for the D&D campaign was one of my first actually like large scale plot weaving exercises that made me feel confident enough to tackle that first like novelization of that screenplay I'd been playing around with. Nice. So the first book I published, that was Starfall, actually recycled a couple of plot lines that unfolded over the course of that role-playing campaign as well, the D&D campaign. Although that was set in fantasy. I then just transposed it over to sci-fi.
Right. There you go.
Yeah. So for me, it started that way. And then it very slowly spiraled into a little bit more, writing.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And it is so much fun to write, and the inspirations for writing can really differ,
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one thing I was going to say too is I didn't do a whole lot of recreational reading growing up, but I loved playing like RPGs, and I just love being in these like fantasy worlds with like a lot of dense wordage and rules and stuff. And that's like where I learned some, vocabulary.
Yeah.
But yeah. D&D tabletop games are fantastic. I love playing them. I used to be a forever DM, not anymore.
And then you switched to a player.
Now I'm a player, and it's pretty nice.
Nice. I mean, both the player and the DM, I think, get a lot of good experience telling a story. But the DM, it's a little more limited. You set the stage. The players are the ones with true agency. And the moment the DM tries to flex that agency, then you're railroading the players. You're not letting them have the joy of discovery of the plot lines. So I found it the same way, where as a player, I felt like it was more fun to be able to direct events. But now my current role when I'm writing stories feels a little bit like a DM, in that sometimes I will set the stage, I will set the context, I'll make the characters, but I do afford them some amount of free agency when I'm writing the book, where I sometimes will be writing and I'll be like, no, this character might do this instead. And I'll allow my outline to flex a little bit to what I imagine the character might want to do in that moment instead.
Totally.
Which it's kind of a fun way to write. It means later on, whenever I do that, I always have a lot of editing to reckon with later when I try to clean up and connect it smoothly. Right. But it is fun to allow stories to have that breathing room where I treat it a little bit like I'm DMing, but the characters of the story are players and they get to decide.
Right. And I mean, I think that helps make your characters feel more alive and have more agency. And I think the same is true in reading a book as it is playing a game at a D&D table. Is like character motivation, the organicness of the character motivation is what really makes the story run.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to talking a little bit more about the audiobook or audiobooks. So you've had 2 of your books turned into audiobooks so far. This is going to be the 3rd one?
Correct. Yes. Men of the Mountain will be number 3.
Fantastic. So we touched on some of this stuff before, but what is your favorite thing about having your works converted to audio?
So I really do think it is the rush and joy of having like your words interpreted by an actor or actress with talent to breathe life into them. Like sometimes I'll write a line and then I'll look back at it and I'll read the sequence of words and it feels a little clunky. But then when someone reads it and they put the right inflection and the right tone and speed, it's like, no, this does sound natural. This is what I'd originally heard in my head. And it's only later on that it looks rough. I feel like the talent of a narrator is almost like a multiplier on top of whatever value I started with in the book. And you can end up with a project that is a lot more, it's immersive. It feels more real because it's brought to life by that talent. I always, when I get the first draft chapters back from narrators, I'm always so excited to dig in because I'm like, I want to see what this product is going to be like. Yeah. And then as I'm listening, I'm like, whoa, there is a whole dimension to the story that I didn't experience myself when I wrote it. Yeah. And that is very, very exciting as a writer to just feel like your work has been breathed into life. Yeah. I can actually still remember what I was doing or where I was when I started drafting for all the audiobooks, when I started like proofing, I should say, for all the audiobooks that I've now had produced. It's like, I remember for like early adopter, I was actually hiking in Colorado when the narrator's like, hey, I finally recorded the first story in the set. You can give it a listen. And I remember listening as I was walking and I was like, whoa, this is hitting all the emotional notes just like I want it to. Nice. I remember for Starfall, I was actually stuck in an airport in Las Vegas for a flight that was delayed like 12 hours. Oof. So I'd hold up in like a Wendy's and I had my laptop and I plugged in and I was listening. And even though I was holed up for 12 hours, I spent like 6 of those listening to a gigantic chunk. And I was like, whoa, this is really coming to life. Nice. And then with yours, I was on a bike ride in a park when I first started to really dive in. Nice. It was in South Florida. It was really hot. But I remember as I was riding my bike, I was like, ooh, he's doing a good job. I remember listening to like a portion where you gave like Hecton Civics a really raspy wheeze. And I was like, wow, he's bringing this character to life. I can see the movie in my head without needing for all the extra sound effects like Graphic Audio's got. And I just, it's very exciting to see coming together.
Yeah. Well, awesome. That's really sweet. That's a sweet answer. That's fun. And that's also, it's kind of funny because I feel like with you saying that you were on a bike ride on a hot day when you heard it, I live in Tucson, Arizona, and I love going on rides on my bike. So I'm always biking on a hot day. So, feels like another piece of connection there. So that's funny.
Yeah. No, I love biking. I love it a lot more in the winter down here.
Same.
Because I feel like our hot weather is probably pretty similar if you're in Tucson. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, of course, like
it's a dry heat by you, right? Where it's like it's a very humid heat by us.
Yeah. But I've visited Florida a few times and I never dry off fully.
Just, you don't get that privilege here.
It's all right. It's all right. Because otherwise you're just desiccating. Otherwise, just
like an actual oven baking.
Literally. Yeah. So I guess let's look at the flip side of that coin. What's the most challenging thing about having your works converted into audio?
So I know that a lot of people, not necessarily, but a lot of people have to reckon with the relinquishing of creative control. I think that when an author writes a story, it's obviously very personal. We pour a lot of ourselves into our work. And when we're writing a book, we have ultimate authority over exactly how a given thing is written, about the order that events are presented. Authors have control over what appears on their cover most of the time, unless you're working with a big publisher. But when you hand it off to an audiobook producer, you're obviously relinquishing a lot of control. And if the narrator decides to read a character in a certain way and deliver a certain line with a certain tone, you don't really have the power to say, hey, go to this chapter, reread this line, but make him sound angrier. Any author who tried to do that would probably be dropped by their narrator pretty quickly. So I feel like the relinquishment of control of something that is otherwise a very personal work can be pretty challenging. And that's why I always try to be very selective with whom I hand my projects off to. I want to make sure that I've listened to enough work to be confident that they will read it in a way that I'm satisfied with. And even when I'm listening through, if I sometimes hear like a certain line read in a way with an inflection different than I imagined, you just kind of have to trust the expert. You have to trust that they're reading it that way because it fits in the performance they're trying to give. I'm sure screenwriters handing their script to an actor have experienced the same thing, where maybe in their head, they thought this line should be read angrily, but then the actor reads it with a little bit more sympathy. But at the end of the day, it's the performance of the actor and the direction of the director that really specifies how the lines are read, more than the intent of the person who wrote the words on the page. So the giving up of creative control, I think, is what a lot of people that I've spoken to might say first. I can say personally, like I said, try to trust the experts. I try to let them do their thing. I'm not a film director. I don't know the right way that every single line should be read.
Right.
But I know that a lot of authors struggle with that specifically.
Yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense. It like writing a book, it's like, that's your baby, you know?
Exactly.
So that makes a lot of sense. And where it can totally be gratifying to have someone shed a new perspective, sometimes it might be like, oh, I don't like that perspective.
Exactly. I'm sure authors love it when it aligns with what they looked for, but if it's a little bit different, they might push back. No, I'm sure most narrators in the industry are very open to working with the author to try to attain their vision.
Totally.
But I'm also sure that if you hired a narrator and sent a list of like 400 corrections for a chapter, reread this with more inflection, change this to be sadder. Yeah. Like I said, that narrator is going to quit the project pretty quickly.
Yeah. That
at a certain point, you got to let them do their thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess, tying these two thoughts together, what would be the advice you would give to authors wanting to make their stories into audiobooks?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing to title the last question is trust the experts. I want you to allow the artists to do what they do well. Just like how if a narrator tried to tell you, hey, rewrite this chapter to do blah, 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 I think an author would be like, this is kind of my wheelhouse. That's your wheelhouse is reading. I'm supposed to be the writer. I think that it's still easy for writers to sometimes get in this mindset of over directing the narrators when you're supposed to trust them to do their craft and do it well. Right. Now, it's very funny that I said a narrator shouldn't tell a writer how to write. In my first book, in Starfall, my narrator had a note that he's like, look, I recorded what you wrote, but he's like, this line was so corny and bad, I recommend you rewrite it. And I looked at it and he was 1000% right. I don't know how that line ended up in the draft, but I sent him an email like, thank you for pointing that out. You were right. It was absolutely awful. I've rewritten it. Here's a new version. He recorded it. No problem. Nice. I really liked that he had the integrity to say, look, this one line is holding this chapter back. It's ridiculously corny, but he didn't make that change for me. He brought it to me. He's like, you really want to consider changing this? And that to me said he's invested in the project. He wants to make this the best version that it can be. And I listened to him in that case, and I'm very glad that I did. Yeah. But outside of that one narrow circumstance, usually, the writers write, the readers read.
Right. And I hear, and I feel like that can kind of go both ways too. Like, because if I got back some critiques were like, oh, can you for this, maybe this scene, can you sort of bring a little more, sadness into the scene? Like that makes sense for sure. I think like anybody, when it becomes very weighty, when
it's micromanaging.
Exactly. It's like, it's not just one sentence in the chapter. It's like a few pages in the chapter, or multiple chapters or something like that. And it's like, that's too much. That's too much.
I think most narrators I've worked with, or all narrators I've worked with, have been very open to general direction of like, here's what I'm looking for, but I leave the details of actually implementing that to the experts, like I've said. Nice. I remember you and I, before we started with Men of the Mountain, we had a lot of conversations setting out expectations for characters. I outlined what I wanted every voice to kind of sound like. Yeah. And I'm very glad we did that, because my first pitch for how I wanted you to handle the character of Fort and Barber, I realized, no, I've given him bad instructions. This read is not going to end up sympathetic like I want it to. Right. So we workshopped it again. And the end result that you came up with, I love. I think you did an awesome job with that character and his arc. And when my girlfriend was listening through it, she's like, oh my God, every time he speaks, I feel so sad for him. Because I think you really did a good job at bringing out a side that would not have been audible if we'd stuck to our original plan. So I like that we had that workshop early on.
Yeah, me too. That was definitely great. And I think it's really funny because you're the first author who's sort of like called me out for what we call the Pokemon, which I think is hilarious.
So there were a few of those by the end, but I know that you got them all.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I just think it was just a really funny process, maybe behind the scenes, if you will, of just doing those character voices just to help me get into the moment I say their names. So it'd be like Fort and Barber, like a woodsman. And stuff like that. And it was just really funny. I never even really noticed how funny it was until I heard it.
Just listening through, because I guess for context for those listening, when I was listening to some of the draft early versions of the chapters, a couple of those were still attached to the quotes at the end because we hadn't quite had the chance to go through and edit them. So a quote from a character would start with them saying their name and their voice as Connor was slipping into the role, and then it would be the quote itself. So I started calling them Pokemoning, and I tagged when they kind of said their name like a Pokemon. Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Exactly. That was funny. And thank you for the context for the listener, because that's good context to have. Yeah, those were the first drafts, which are, first draft.
Oh, yeah. So. First draft of the book is real rough, too. But it takes a lot of time just slowly sanding it away to be something polished.
Absolutely. Well, Drew, thank you so much for talking with me today. I have some concluding questions for you.
Sure.
For those who want to learn more about you and hear more of your insights, where can they go?
So my website that I have, it's like drewharrisonbooks.wix. I will put it in the description. You'll be able to find all of my projects that are there. There is a button to join a little newsletter list. I don't use it that heavily right now, but I'm hoping to ramp that up. Yeah. I also have a Facebook presence under the name Drew Harrison Books, where I'm a little more active, and again, hoping to become more active in the future. It's just right now I focus on writing, and then I focus on promoting the books on traditional channels. And then whatever time I have left over, I throw into just posting occasional updates on social media. Yeah. So those are the best places really to look. Is the website directly. Whenever I have a new book project, I'll put a link on my website. And then I'll also sometimes put forums where people can request to be beta readers for my books, because I'm always interested in hearing the reactions from early readers.
Right.
So look for links in whatever description you may see.
Yes,
there'll be
absolutely.
the Facebook group and the website.
Yes. Look in the episode notes. They'll be there, folks. And another question is, do you have any events coming up in the near future that people should keep an eye out for?
Yes, I actually happen to have 2 on the calendar. They're both in South and Central Florida.
Okay.
On June 20th, 2026, I will be at the Read It, Write It Book Festival in Wellington, Florida.
Nice.
That's actually going to be at the Wellington Mall. I'm going to have a table at that mall among other book vendors, and I'm going to be talking with readers and selling books and chatting with people. So if you happen to be anywhere near Wellington, you can definitely stop by. And if you say that you heard about this from the podcast, definitely let me know. I'd love to actually see, anyone who listened to this and wanted to come out, would love to talk to you. And then exactly a week later, I have an event at a bookshop. It's on June 27th. That one is in Oviedo, Florida, which is pretty close to Orlando. I'm actually doing a little bit of a road trip to get there. Nice. But it's at Shelf Life Books and Gifts. And that'll be in the afternoon at that little bookstore. I'll be actually sharing the space with another author and anyone who happens to stop by. Again, happy to shake hands, talk books and craft. And I'll have a lot of signed copies of books to sell as well.
Nice. Awesome. So folks, if you are nearby and want to go to those venues and meet up with Drew, check out the episode notes. We will have links to those event details, and you can go ahead and meet Drew.
So yeah, I love to chat with readers. It's one of my favorite parts about doing this writing stuff is getting to talk to people who have read books, even if it's not about my books. I just like to talk about books. I like to chat with people. Whenever they come up to my table, I ask who do you like to read? And then sometimes I'll use that to inform recommendations for what's best among my titles. Otherwise, just to, talk shop.
Nice. Absolutely. So folks, go have a conversation. I can tell you from personal experience, it's a good time. So, Drew, thank you so much for your time today, and I've done something maybe a little tricky. I have made a few questions to end with that I did not give you.
Ooh, interesting,
the hardest hitting questions. There are going to be 2 segments. One is a rapid fire question. You just have to answer real short, and then I have one last ending question for you. So,
bring them on.
Let's start with the rapid fire. The Fifth Element or Blade Runner?
Blade Runner, but close. Okay. Blade Runner, though.
Fallout or Cyberpunk 2077?
Okay, so now you're kind of arguing current taste versus childhood. I played a lot of the Fallout games growing up. Cyberpunk, though, I'm going to have to say Fallout. I have to go with my childhood favorites.
Perfect. All right. Dune or Star Trek?
Dune.
I
have to acknowledge the pillar of the genre. So much of what I write is thanks to Dune. Dune started it all.
Nice. Well, that's the end of the rapid fire questions.
There we go.
And now my final question for you. If you could have one cybernetic implant, what would it be?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Am I allowed to say I don't want a cybernetic implant?
You're allowed to. You're allowed to. You don't have to.
I feel like that's giving into the dystopia. That's kind of like bringing about the arrival of cyberpunk. I don't know that I really want that to happen, but maybe sometimes I feel a little disorganized. I feel like just gonna leave a little chip that manages my calendar in my head and tells me about appointments and things. Nice. I think I can get use out of that without feeling like I'm becoming the robots too much.
Yeah, get like an agent.
I go for some kind of glorified schedule manager implant. That's all I need.
Perfect.
There we go.
Well, with that is the last of the questions that I have for you today. Drew, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with us about your writing experience, about, the importance of sci-fi and the cyberpunk genre and thought leadership. And I mean, so many other things. This has been a longer conversation than I usually have, but it's been a lot of fun.
I agree. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I am so excited to get Men of the Mountains audiobook published in the short-term future. Hopefully by the time whatever listener is listening to this, it's hopefully already out in the world.
Absolutely. And folks, you'll hear me interrupt the episode if that's the case.
Awesome.
Go check out the episode notes, see Drew Harrison's books, see what events he is going to be attending, And yeah, until next we turn the page, toodaloo.
Bye.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the interview. This one was a lot of fun. I had a blast. We definitely ran over on time, as you can tell, but that's okay. You know, it worked for both of our schedules, and I think we had a pretty good time. I can't put words in Drew's mouth, but, you know, if I were to go ahead and, you know, roll an insight check, I would say he probably had a pretty good time. Drew, thanks a ton for coming on to the show this week. I really appreciate it. Thank you for choosing me to be your narrator for Men of the Mountain. I'm so freaking excited for it. Folks, if you are wanting some of them early access codes, there is a Google Forms link in the episode notes. Go check out the episode notes. Click that Google link. Click the Google Forms link and fill that form out. And see if you can get your hands on an early preview copy of The Men of the Mountain. The preview period starts June 24th, and the book itself launches July 10th. So keep your eyes out, keep your ears out, and I will definitely let you know when Men of the Mountain, the audiobook, hits the digital shelves. Thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Until next we turn the page, toodaloo. Until next we turn the page, toodaloo. This has been Connor Reads Books. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have, please share and leave a review. Feel free to check out my social medias at @LConnorVoice. Links in the episode notes. A big thank you to Louis Sanders, the producer of the Connor Reads Books theme song. Until next we turn the page, toodaloo.